That's why I was getting my computer close.
I think we are hearing you very well, just a small echo, but it's not a good deal. It's not a big deal.
Okay.
We can just quickly interrupt. Just want to do a technical check with all of you guys. I just want to make sure that you can mute and unmute yourself as you wish.
Yes.
There's Rafael, who didn't join the meeting, and also Sean. Okay, just send them the links. And
yeah.
Not yet. So you told me that you have to leave in 15 minutes, in 11:45?
Yeah, at 11:50 I have to log out and log into our own.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay.
Really appreciate making the time for this conference and for our graduates consortium.
I think I can mute and unmute myself, no problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we still don't have Hi, Sean.
Bonjour, hello.
Bonjour.
So thank you very much for inviting me. I think we're waiting for Rafael, right?
Yes, exactly. And for the other students, because we are running late today.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Hello. There is problem of network. Is there any problem? Network problem?
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Hi, we can hear you perfectly. We are just asking to leave all questions either to the chat or till the very end. If you do have a question or want to make a comment, if you just raise your hand using the raise hand function, then I will mark down your name, and then that way we can recognize you and it won't interrupt the actual speaking process. So we appreciate that. And also after you've spoken, if you can mute yourself, that would be awesome. Thank you.
So we are waiting for Professor Rafael Gomez, but I think we should start, and since we have only 45 minutes, just send him an email and we'll check whether he can join us.
Oh, but perhaps I can start and then
Yes.
he has the time to join us.
So yes, I will start right now. Thank you, Dr. Anna. So hello everybody, thank you for joining us for this panel entitled Global Studies in an Era of Global Challenges. If you are looking for the working outside of academia panel, you can find the link in the chat box. So we have two different panel at the same time. So my name is Sondes Turki, and I'm a PhD candidate at the School of Industrial Relations of University of Montreal. And we have today with us three excellent panelists that I would like to introduce. But first of all, we have an update to our list of panelists from the program. We would like to welcome Professor Sean O'Brady, Assistant Professor at DeGroote School of Business, at McMaster University. Regretfully, Professor Patrice Jalette was unable to attend, so we was not able to modify this on the program. So each panelist will have approximately 10 minutes to speak to their experiences and the questions we've submitted in advance, and almost 5 minutes to answer your questions that come up during the session. Thank you to the student that submitted questions in advance, and you can also submit questions to me through the chat box accessible on the right-hand side of your screen. So simply select a private message to me or to Natalia and send in your question, please. And apologies in advance if we cannot get to all of the questions. So our first speaker for today is Dr. Anna Triandafyllidou. I'm sorry for this pronunciation. And she received her PhD from the European University Institute and holds the position of a professor at the Department of Sociology of Ryerson University. She held teaching and researching positions at different universities in Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Finland, France, Greece, Italy, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Sweden, UK, so huge international experience. Thank you for joining us today. Our second speaker is going to be Professor Rafael Gomez, waiting for him, and I will introduce him later. And our third speaker will be Professor Sean O'Brady. He's an assistant professor at DeGroote School of Business, McMaster University. He received his PhD in industrial relations from University of Montreal and completed postdoctoral research at Cornell University. He conducted several studies in Canada, Belgium, Germany, Sweden, and US. So he has also a very wide international experience. Thank you for joining us and welcome. We prepared the draft of questions for the panel. I will just read the three questions very fast. So you will be able to ask different questions, for this session. So the first question we ask, what are the main challenges of an international research or study experience? What are the measures taken by your department or research center to make this kind of experience more enjoyable? What are the main learning advantages and repercussions linked to an international research or study experience that a researcher or student can draw? And finally, based on your experience, what advice do you have for academics in the HR or IR field to choose their international experience wisely and get the most out of it? So over to you, Dr. Anna. Thank you for joining us and welcome.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you all for making the time to attend this panel. It is always a pleasure when one is asked to speak about themselves, basically. And I think academics, we are egocentric enough to like to reflect on our experiences. But you know, beyond the joke, I do appreciate the opportunity to reflect a bit on what it means, you know, to engage in within an international academic environment, and also to practice international mobility. Actually, I currently hold at Ryerson University in Toronto as of August 2019, the Canada Excellence Research Chair in Migration and Integration. And since in a way I'm practicing what I study, which to some extent is convenient. I am a Greek by origin. I'm a Greek citizen, and I did my undergrad in Athens. And I think the first reflection or advice that I want to share is that I think in life, one has to take things one step at a time. So when I was an undergrad in Athens, I really was looking forward to do some graduate studies, and I was looking for opportunities also for a scholarship. And it is not that at the time I had already decided I would live outside Greece for the most part of my life, or I want to be an academic here specifically or there. I have to say, and of course it was a different time, we're talking about the late 80s. I was at the undergrad between 1986 and 1990. There was a bit less mobility and less connectivity compared to today. There was no email, no internet. I think email became something while I was doing my PhD. So, and I do remember vividly going to the British Council and to the French Consulate in Athens physically and in their library to look for, you know, graduate study abroad programs and scholarships. So, as I said, one thing is one step at a time. It is not possible in life to make plans like I'm going to do A and then B and then C, because oftentimes it won't work like that. And at the time, for me, already completing my PhD was quite something. It so happened that I mean, I was really fortunate to be accepted to do my PhD at the European University Institute in Florence, in Italy, which is, for those that don't know, it's not an Italian university, it's a European Union doctoral and postdoctoral studies center. And that was really a great experience in that we were actually, by definition at the EUI, people are by proportion of the EU countries' population. So every year they would accept, say, 4 Greeks, but 20 Germans and 15 Italians, and I don't know, 12 Spaniards and so on. So we were a very diverse group, including some people from Latin America through a special program that the Italian ministry had at the time, and also some people from Eurasia. And after that, I just knew I wanted to stay abroad rather than go back to Greece. So you know, I applied for postdocs and positions. I went for 1 year in Brussels, and then I went to the LSE in London, and then came back to Rome. Anyway, to cut the long story short, I think I've lived a good part of my life also in Italy, different parts of Italy. And my last job before coming here was at the European University Institute, again as a full professor, as the Robert Schuman Chair. I think, as I said, beyond saying take one step at a time, and sometimes it's life that decides for you. So I remember when I finished my position at the London School of Economics, and I think that was 1997. And again, I was applying for jobs in Britain. At the time, I wanted to stay in Britain, but I had also applied for a Marie Curie Fellowship, which is a mobility fellowship in the EU, and it still exists, and actually is a very, it's a wonderful program and a very prestigious one, but you have to move. You shouldn't stay in the country where you're in, and you shouldn't go to your own country. So I had applied to go to Rome, as I knew a senior scientist there who had the same interests as I did. And it so happened that the Marie Curie results came before I got an offer for another job. So I have often thought what would have happened if I got a normal job in Britain as a lecturer, then would I have stayed for my entire life in Britain or for a good part of my life? So this is also to say sometimes it's just, you just apply it. And I would also have another advice, which is we all have one job to take and the employer has one job to give. And we should, like the employer has to ponder who is the best candidate for this position. You also have to ponder and take a decision. You shouldn't be discouraged from negative answers, because inevitably you have to listen to many no's until you get that yes. And that says nothing about the value of your work and the value of you as a person, as an academic, because there's a lot of factors that play into this, which has to do with some perhaps more details about what the job exactly is, who they're looking for that you don't know. Of course, how you perform the day of the interview, which really can make you win or lose. There are many factors at play. And as I said, although of course it's very stressful, and I think I've been through this enough times in my life to know that this is stressful. As I said, you should just keep thinking that it's, I mean, there is a certain level of good and bad luck involved, and you shouldn't allow negative responses to depress you. I have to say that in the European context, what is different from here, and I'm realizing this, even though I study migration and I know about these things, it's different when you practice them. In the EU, if you are an EU citizen, moving from one country to another is pretty smooth. It was a bit less smooth when I started moving in the early 90s, but progressively it has gotten really easy. For whatever regards, your papers, your children's papers, your health coverage, all the paperwork. And for us, for me and my family, coming to Canada in that respect, although we do find Canada very, very welcoming, it is, and although we knew it, when you face all the paperwork, you are taken a bit by surprise. I think there's a lot of good things about mobility. I haven't never, and I have to say, I mean, in the way some people call it, I've held many precarious jobs in my life. I have not seen them as precarious. I have seen them as very dynamic, and I have enjoyed. The truth is, I haven't spent much of my career in a conventional university job, like with lots of teaching. I have seen this as a wonderful opportunity. Of course, sometimes, as I said, it is stressful. Mobility can be stressful, and also changing jobs, doing a lot of research can be stressful in that normally in a normal university job, you would be on a tenure track, you do probably a lot of teaching, but then you can be calm at the background. For me, it has worked and I have really enjoyed it. But I have also faced, of course, some level of uncertainty and mobility for my family, a double career family. A good part of our married life, I've been married for 20 years, has been spent geographically apart with my husband. And I have to say, as an older Danish woman professor told me a couple of, actually we were having a common seminar, and she said it during that seminar. She said, I tell all the women graduate students or young scholars that I know, and the men in this room, forgive me, she said, you cannot choose in this life where you're born, which country, which family, a lot of structural conditions. One thing you can choose is your partner. And sometimes your partner can be crucial for your career. And I think I subscribe to what she said. So it's not easy for women, but also for men to accommodate double career families. But with some flexibility, I think it is doable. And for us, this flexibility has implied also living apart. And in those times, the children were with me. And although maybe practically it was challenging for me, it was, I think, more challenging for my husband to be away, geographically away from us and commute. The last thing I want to say is I think moving and working in an international environment makes you, I believe, a better person. And even if in a way I study diversity by studying migration, the experience of moving and the experience of integrating into a new environment always adds a layer of complexity, but a layer of richness. And we are finding that the experience in Canada is really teaching us a lot of things, and we are learning a lot. And to conclude, because I think my time is up, I only hope that my children won't tell me one day, I didn't enjoy that. I didn't enjoy changing countries and schools. And I don't see this as an asset. Well, in theory, you might say, oh, this is so wonderful. They've had such opportunities. They learned languages. They made friends. And I think I'll leave it at that. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. I think you raise an interesting point about the difference about in Canada and Europe. And we did have a question about this. What are some of the key differences between the Canadian academic market and the European academic market? Do you have any further information to add? Or
yes, I would say in the European academic market right now, the only market that has been truly international was the UK, to a lesser extent the Netherlands, increasingly the Nordic countries, to some extent France and Germany. But in the UK, and I would say that the UK is different even from Canada or the US, you don't even need to have a PhD from a British university to be hired in the UK. I would say that Canada is a world in one place, particularly, the big cities. It's truly amazing and it's wonderful. But it occurs to me, unless you come as I came at the very senior level, and I was actually, I was part of a search drive of Ryerson for the Excellence Chair. And of course, it was a wonderful opportunity, and I applied, and eventually it worked. I think in Canada, unless you have a PhD in Canada, it is very difficult to get a job. So this is a reflection. A second reflection that strikes me is language. Europe is much more multilingual, and of course, English is the working language, to a much lesser extent, French or German. But there is a richness of languages that is cultivated even in the professional environment, which is here not the case. And I do feel for the French speaking in Canada, but I'm a big partisan of the Quebecois, as after having arrived in very English speaking Toronto.
Thank you so much for this answer. Can you also answer the question, or?
Yeah, I'll answer the question, before.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
I think we have a very interesting question, and from your experience. So one student from the audience said, we never come back from international experiences to what we were before. How can academic institutions make sure they are open to these changed students or professors upon their return? And how can they better facilitate the transfer of learnings from these professors or students?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I totally agree that actually sometimes also the periods of mobility are understood in a bilateral way. So like you go somewhere and then you go back, and this is not the case. And I think the predicament of the international academic is also, you'll never be happy as you were in a way. Like when you were in your country, you knew no other. And you probably were frustrated with some things, or at least I was, but then that was your world. And once you have lived for a number of years somewhere else, then you appreciate it differently, but also in some way, nothing is ever perfect anymore. But I do think it's very important for universities today to realize that it's not from A to B and back to A, it's from A to B to C to D. I don't think universities have, and this is a very good point for me also for reflection in my next steps at Ryerson. I think universities rather expect that you integrate, you adjust to what is the university culture. There's no special provision for you to contribute your cultural and social capital that you bring from other universities and other countries, and that's a very good point. I just want to very briefly react to the question about the permanent and long-term and short-term jobs.
Yeah.
What I see internationally is, I think, a certain precarization of academia, but in what sense? In the sense of consultancies. So there are today, at least, again, maybe more in Europe than in Canada. I don't know enough about Canada in this year. But like in Europe, there's many now opportunities to do short consultancies, like to write a report, a policy paper, to do a small study. And these are well paid, but they're very much like, they ask you today, you have to be available next week, and the job will be done in a week, 3 weeks, 3 months. So it's not a career, it's a way of making yourself known, doing some interesting work and be well paid, but it doesn't lead very far. And I think this is worrying. It is worrying, while on the other hand, it offers also opportunities. And I have to say, through most of my career, I always was quick to pick up these opportunities, because sometimes they can lead, but like in a more long-term perspective to something. And sometimes, and I'll say something again gendered, they might come when you just gave birth or your kids are going through a difficult phase, and you do have to take them up if you want to have a career. Unfortunately, the timing cannot always be right, and if you don't take that opportunity up, maybe it will not come again, particularly if you're young to mid-career. And in terms of the more short-term and long-term jobs, I think the university, I mean, we tend to complain, but I think we're well off, we're well secure and well, how can I say, we have good benefits, good conditions of work, a lot of freedom. So I would also say that we should also look around, what is happening in general. Of course, as I said, at the same time, there should be a concern about some job security. And I'll say this, and I'll have to leave. I think there is a bit of a trade-off, or at least this has been my experience, and I may be wrong, but this has been my experience. There is a bit of a trade-off between a long-term, more intensive teaching job and a more research job that will, however, have some instability or some, as I said, I didn't experience it so much as precariousness. I experienced it as a dynamic movement. So when I decided in 2004, mainly for family reasons, to go back to Athens, between 2004 and 2009, that I left Athens again, I needed to fundraise for both my position and my team's position. That was a wonderful period in my life. It felt a big accomplishment, and I did learn a lot, and the environment was much less equipped, much less well equipped than what I had been used to. But it was very satisfactory. Of course, there have been moments, and I remember them vividly, where I was telling my husband, "Oh my God, me and the whole of my team are not going to have a job in 8 months," because, as you know, projects you have to think today for next year. So anyway, but this is of course my experience.
What an inspiring experience, and we would like to thank you for this answer, for your intervention, and it was great to have you today with us. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Anna.
very much. Thank you too.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye. So our next speaker will be Professor Patrice Jalette, and he's the director of the PhD program at the School of Industrial Relations, Université de Montréal. Welcome, Patrice, and thank you for being with us today.
Yeah.
And we made a lot of changes, and
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sondes. I just hope that I received the right questions, because I'm stepping in for Rafael, but
he's missing.
Yeah. So what are the main challenges of international research or study experience? That's what I receive as question. And I think all these challenges associated with research and abroad, it's well documented in the literature. I suggest you to read Richard Hyman, for one, who's saying that the international comparison are necessary, but are nearly impossible to do for different reasons. So it's quite interesting. But I would like to present you two main challenges. The first one Anna mentioned. The first one is language. I think in order for you to have a full research or study abroad experience, you must be minimally proficient in the local language, or at least able to deal with in this language. There are more than words in a language. There are values, way of thinking, tradition, norm, and of course culture. So don't think you can fully live a study or a field research experience outside major centers like Copenhagen. I'm saying Julie, like in major centers like Copenhagen or Montreal. If you have no notion of Danish or French. The second big challenge, I think it's time. I think that it takes time to get to know the country where you are studying or doing research. Otherwise, why be abroad? So I don't know if you're familiar with a paper that was published in 2019. It's by Allman and Conley. It's entitled "A Manifesto for Slow Comparative Research on Work and Employment." It was published in the European Journal of Industrial Relations. The thesis of the author is that we need to develop a framework, a comparative methodology called slow comparatism, in order to have a deeper and more reliable understanding of the nature and the reason for transnational differences and similarities. It takes time. If you have more, especially if for field work, in their paper they recommend to go many times in order to get more to get a grasp on the culture, values, norm. And if you're not able to take the time, it's only academic tourism. Of course, it's quite interesting to visit many countries and say, oh, I'm a specialist in that country because I spent 2 weeks there. I think if you want to have the full experience, you have to stay for a while, or do many trips, separated trips. So that was my answer to the first question. Is it okay, Sondes?
Yes, absolutely. The second part of the first question. So as a director of the PhD program, can you, for example, present the measures taken by our department and let's say the School of Industrial Relations to make this kind of experience enjoyable to their students?
Yeah, but I think there is for instance, at Université de Montréal, there is a whole structure that is where you can there is a whole structure to support this student mobility. I think that Sean could talk about that a bit because he experienced it a few years ago. For instance, after it's not a policy from our department, but many students, after their comprehensive exam, they spend sometimes abroad just to get other to create a new network of contact, and this is quite profitable for their thesis after. But in the last few years, we had more and more comparative thesis, so which I think it gives a great richness to the student experience at the PhD level. So I don't know what you had to this part of the question.
That's fine. Yeah, thank you so much. Do you want to go over the question too, or?
Yeah. What are the main learnings and advantages? I would say first, why do international research? I think one thing that you learn with that, I think the most interesting benefit is it helps you to put things into perspective in your own country. I never questioned myself about many things regarding our industrial relations system before I went abroad and tried to understand the Australian, for instance, industrial relations system. And for instance, it made me realize that why here we have, I think, a much more cooperative labor management relationships than in Australia, for instance. So I think when you go abroad, you do international comparison, you learn not only on the country that you are studying, but also about your own country. I think that's one great benefit of international research. The other question is why go study abroad? I think one major benefit for PhD students is of this kind of experience is to highlight your CV. It will help you to distinguish it from the others, the CVs of other students. So when you have people, when you are when you try to hire someone, and you see that there is some kind of international experience, it tells you that this person has some kind of a bigger network, which is always a great asset for a young researcher and for a department. So I know if it's clear in French, I would say l'expérience internationale donne plus de relief à un CV là. So I think that it helps to distinguish your CV from others. The third question. I think one way, first you have to think about your international experience. You have to have some kind of a reflection. It's not a decision that you take lightly only in one weekend. I think that there must be some kind of reflection. Why go there? You know, when you do international research or comparative research, the classic question that all the reviewers are asking will ask you is, why these countries? Why did you choose these countries? And of course, when you are answering a reviewer for a paper, you're not telling them because you have friends in that country and you have fun working with them, of course. But you know, you take the variety of capitalism theory and so forth, of course. But my point is just that you have to justify, to be sure what you're trying to get out of this experience. For instance, of course, if you have regarding research, it has to fit. If you want to do a comparison between North and South, that's one thing. If it's between Anglo-Saxon countries, it is. Do you want to CMEs compare CMEs or LMEs? So all these things you need to think about. And of course, if you want to go study abroad, it involves also some kind of a deep reflection. So
thank you for these thoughts and for this answer. I think we have one question for you. So it's about also to diffuse your work internationally. So one of student of our audience asked, what are some practical steps to communicate our research to a global audience? And in other cases, like beyond academia too. We are not hearing you. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Great questions, and in many ways, I think I'm much more old school regarding that. Of course, academic reviews are one main way to diffuse our research, and also it helps you getting promoted, and that's what we do as academia, is to, and that's one thing. But of course, now you have all these social media that you can use. You have these blogs like the Conversation. You have many ways, many network in which you can publish your work. But if you want to do a career in academia, I would recommend strongly to publish in international journals in our domain. So.
Thank you, Professor Patrice. I think you are highlighting the fact that international experience adds a lot to our CV. So thank you for this. So our last speaker, the last and not the least, Professor Sean O'Brady, welcome again. And so you can answer the questions or go in a very unstructured way. It's up to you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I did prepare answers to some of these questions, but there's limited time. So I might do a bit of rapid fire on them.
Okay, you will have 10 minutes.
And I'm a fast talker though, so maybe it'll be all right.
Great. Thank you so much.
So on question one, because that's how I prepared it, I agree entirely with Patrice. Actually, Patrice stole my idea without knowing he stole my idea. I was actually going to recommend the same paper as him, so you could tell that I was trained at that university and that I think in similar terms. Because I'll say the same thing. And to mention one of the authors of that paper, Phil Almond.
Yeah, I just want to add that I put the link, the name and the title of this paper in the chat box. Great.
And so Phil Almond is against what he calls fast comparativism. And this is the idea, somebody goes, they book a 1-week trip to, Germany from the United States. You go there, you gather some interviews, and then you write a paper like you're an expert on Germany, right? It doesn't work like that. You have to take a lot of time to get the culture, to understand the norms of what's going on. You learn language. If you're going to Germany and you're only doing it in English, you're going to have a tough time. You also have to gain a legitimacy. There's a question of trust when you go to international, when you're doing international research, right? If you live in Quebec or in Ontario and you contact a union, they're going to see you from a university in Ontario that they recognize and they trust, right? So they'll say, oh, okay, I'll work with that student. But if you go to Germany, they don't know your university. They just see a foreigner coming and taking a flight coming in, right? So you have to really build relationships. You have to start speaking to people and then they recommend other people and they recommend other people and so on and so forth. So challenge number one is the time it takes to get familiar with the culture, language, and to build trust. Challenge number 2 is, if you're collaborating with people, there's also coordination with researchers. And these researchers, will have different objectives. In the UK, for example, in business schools at least, they're very big on rankings. Certain journals matter more to people. Certain types of research matter more. There's certain types of methodologies that are used more than elsewhere. So this could require a lot of, discussion with people. There's also a question, if you do action-oriented research like myself, I work a lot with trade unions, and I try to please trade unions in countries, and they have different needs across countries. So if you rope them in, it can make your project all the more complicated, because then all of a sudden, if you're doing comparative research or you're looking at studying actors in different places, you have to please different types of people in different ways. Challenge number three, there's the question of your research tools. Now, you got to think, you're no longer thinking, if you're Canadian or American or wherever, you're no longer thinking in the terms of your countries when you're preparing, your questionnaires or your interview grids. You have to realize that things mean something very different in different countries. So for example, I studied partnership in Canada and Sweden. And I noticed that, when you talk about partnership, it's very micro in Canada. It's a lot about just relationship building between unions, union officials, and managers. In Sweden, it's like a societal thing. There's social dialogue. You're talking about it in very different ways. It's sectoral. It's not company level that matters. Multiple employers and sometimes multiple unions, or a single union dealing with multiple employers. So the terminology you use has to be adapted. And for that, you have to do literature. You have to talk to people, right? And then finally, the fourth challenge, I would say in IR, and Patrice was saying, and I'll get to there's a benefit of doing international research, but at least if you're in industrial relations, you study work and employment. It comes in both ways. There's also one challenge is there's this label, and you'll hear about this, when I speak to IR people in Europe, for example, that you're European. So I published an article in the European Journal of Industrial Relations, and even though I study North American countries, people view my research as being European in nature, and some people don't respond the same way to European research. They say, okay, that's something different. I'm going to stick to reading, if you're in the US, there are a lot of people that read all the literature in the US on partnership, for example, but they don't read the stuff produced in Europe. So there is a bit of, there's a little bit of a niche there, but it can kind of label you, which could work to your advantage in the sense that you're saying, hey, I'm international, I look at these countries. And there's the downside that some people might say, okay, what you do is different, so I'll be less likely to read it. So there's a bit of that, there's some truth to that. In terms of what the department does, I did my PhD at UDM. They had, the crimped, and there were so many resources for you to do international research. They have money to send you to different countries to do stages or to do field work. It was actually a great experience in that way. So if you're an international researcher and you're doing it at UDM, there were unparalleled access. There was also an international network. You meet all these professors from different countries. So if you have to meet practitioners or people, you already have these people available to you, professors that know you through the research center, to say, hey, can you provide me advice on how to do research here on this? And you got people. In terms of my current department, I'm at the De Groot School of Business. Students here could do it, but we're flooding with cash in a different way. We don't have a research center like that and a network like that, but the professors here have a lot of money for support. So if somebody were to come do a PhD under me, I would have lots of cash to toss at them to support this research, because it's a business school that I don't know how anyways, there's stuff flowing around. Question number 2. What are the benefits of international research, you could say? Well, first of all, one of the cool things about international research, and you'll notice this if you really, really are dedicated to it, it's a lot more complicated. It takes a lot more work. That's one more thing I should mention. If you study only, for example, trade unions and precarious work in the US, you have to read less literature. If you're looking at different countries, you have to read about the literatures in the different countries. So it's a lot more demanding. But if you're doing that, it's also richer, because you'll notice that in some countries, like in Europe, they're a lot more advanced on certain topics than they are in Canada. And the reverse can be true. But for example, when I was looking at the importance of power and institutions to union management collaboration, for example, they have so many studies on this that are so advanced thinking about it in terms of, and there's very little on this actually in North American context. So you notice if you start opening your mind and start thinking, I'm going to read different things from different countries, it actually makes your life a lot easier for framing your contribution. Because you could say, well, the Europeans are talking about this in a way that's a lot more advanced. I'm going to bring these ideas to a study that includes United States or Canada. So all of a sudden your contributions are becoming easier because you're reflecting on literatures in different ways. The second thing is, yes, I think I'm of the view that field work is necessary, even if you're quantitative, because you notice once you go in and you start speaking to people on the ground, things are almost never the way you read it. I know one professor that says, I really understand how things work in China, but he's never been to China. You don't know, because when I went to Europe, when I went to Belgium, to Germany, to Sweden, and I met with union guys and companies, I realized that the reality is fundamentally different than I read. Even something as simple as bargaining coverage. You know, bargaining coverage in Belgium was a lot higher than what I read. And it's just because the stats, like there's just everything, you'll notice almost everything, it can be questioned once you go in. So I stress field work. I agree with Patrice about comparative research enables you to see what happens in your own country in a more critical way. The international research does this. I also think that doing international research enables you to have international exposure in a different way and to broaden your research. So once you're doing international research, more people know you. If you're doing only research in Canada, you'll be known in Canada, but not internationally, right? But once you go to different countries, you meet professors from different countries, all of a sudden more people are interested in your work. And I got to tell you, if you're from a small country especially, and you study something like trade unions, not a lot of people are going to read your work because there's a very small community there. Once you start including more countries, you'll have more people who read your work, and you'll just be more attractive, I think, as an academic. So I do agree with Patrice about the distinguishing your CV. There is the risk of being labeled, for example, European in my case. But in general, part of why I was hired at the group is they saw me as a very international person. I go to different countries, you know, people are starting to know me in different countries, and they saw this as very attractive because institutions right now are about building international reputation. And these are people who don't study trade unions who are at my job talk, right? I was able to make the case that I'm very relevant to being hired, even though my subject matter is quite unique to this business school in the sense that, anyways. And then quick statements about what you should do, what I recommend. Lots of planning, right? You have to, if you're going to do international research, you have to do a lot of reading. You have to do a lot of talking to people, studying before, planning all the things you're going to do, because it's a lot more complicated than a local project. It's good to create timelines. If you have partners involved, academic and practitioners, it's good to communicate expectations so that you can kind of, because you might think, oh, somebody might expect you to do something in one country, but the expectations of what you'll produce and how you'd go about it might be different in another country. And think a lot about your audience. Who do you want to read your work? And you have to really think about the literature and how you engage and which conferences you go to. Because if you start doing international research and you're going to the wrong conferences, well, you're losing a lot of opportunities than hitting the right conferences. And I think I'm going to stop with that.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for these thoughts. It's really interesting to link also with your international experience and what you have been through, like as a PhD student and also as a professor. So we have a question for you also. How do you predict the pandemic will affect this global academic work? Does it affect you now? Are you hearing, Sean?
Patrice started speaking, but I think he was on mute. He just turned his mute off. Oh,
yeah,
how does
go ahead. Go ahead.
How does the pandemic affect my global work? Is your question?
Yes.
Well, of course, you know, there's a lot of research on this, that human interaction is critical to anything you do, right? Whether it's research. So there is a hit in that element. You know, I can't walk into a grocery store and just interview people like I did before. I can't go to a call center now. They're all being emptied. I look at call centers and retail across different countries. Those are my two areas that I'm doing research on. But I can say that if you have the right connections with the right people, there are a lot of opportunities for me. So I've tilted all my research towards, right now it's mostly on call centers at the moment, towards understanding tech change and how it interacts with COVID-19, the crisis, and the effects on job quality in different countries. I'm working with some people in UK and the United States, in Norway, and we're going to be looking at these countries and Norway and Germany as well. And these and there are a lot of opportunities in the sense that, you know, everybody needs knowledge on this right now, immediate, and there are some doors that are being opened. So even though so basically I think it's just a question of adaptation. I'm finding ways to do my work remotely, to be able to get some data, to gather it. And there is the question, I do believe you have to do field work and to understand your country, but all of the team that I'm working with right now has done this already in these countries. So there's already that kind of that base knowledge that we're building on. So I think in this case, it's more about adaptation and seizing opportunities. I'll let Patrice continue. I think it looks like he's got an idea.
Thank you. Patrice, do you want to add something?
Just one minute.
Okay.
Of course, it has a huge impact. We can almost, it's quite difficult to do interviews in face to face, and it's basically what we do. Another impact. One of my MA students was the master dissertation was on shortages of labor. So you can understand that at this point there's no shortage of labor. So you had to turn around this her subject. But I agree with Sean. There are a lot of opportunities that are created, but because I don't know how if it will be possible, right, to do business as usual regarding our research. I think that people in the field, in the workplaces, they will want to talk about that. But maybe I'm wrong about that. But I don't know if they will be willing to talk about their day-to-day problems on the work floor, beside those that they experienced during the COVID and after that, after the confinement. So yes, there are some opportunities, but we don't know yet if it will have an effect that will last for a few years. So it's total uncharted territories at this point. I would say regarding COVID. So
thank you. This is really interesting. Any final thought from Sean? Like positive thought to end this session? You have to yeah.
I guess one small thought, and just because Anna was talking about a lot about careers, and so I guess I'll make one point about that. A lot of you are, I don't know if everybody here is a doctoral student. I don't know what types. I'd assume so, or at least most would be. But if you're looking for jobs, one thing I learned, and if you're looking internationally, is wherever you think you could see a fit, you should definitely apply. And you never know what people on the committees reviewing your application will zero in as important. You know, in my case, it was a guy in social entrepreneurship who I had two main advocates, and one of them was him, who fought really hard to get me hired at my institution. Now, this guy doesn't even, I couldn't predict it. He liked that I had a bachelor's in political science. He did research in Sweden, right? He's not even an IR person who was advocating that I be hired. You never know what the people on a committee will be interested in. So my view is you apply anywhere that you think that you'd like to work at finally, and that you could see yourself being. And it's once you prepare a couple applications, it's very easy to just adapt them, and in an hour you could apply to a position, right? So yeah, that's my final point.
Wow, thank you so much. Okay, that concludes the time we have for today. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Patrice. Thank you, Anna. She left before. And thank you for people who participate virtually to this session. As a token of our appreciation, we have arranging for a delivery of fresh coffee beans to you. So for Patrice and Sean from Coffee Ecology, and these beans are ethically sourced and delivered by electric vehicles. We are now taking a lunchtime break until 1:15. If you'd like to join us for some lunchtime yoga, that will begin in 2 minutes, and I will put the link in the chat box. So you have few minutes to get a bit to eat and join us for this for the next session. Thank you so much. Thank you.